Yay. All right, this is Sadie. Welcome, everyone. Sorry, and I'm in two different spots. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my camera here, but you're going to hear me through the other area. But welcome, everyone. I'm Sadie Martinez. I'm Access and Functional Needs Coordinator here at the Colorado Office of Emergency Management. We sit in the Colorado Department of Public Safety under the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. My focus is to operate our team, and our team looks at the whole community inclusion in emergency management, starting from the local level all the way up to the state and then nationally. And so there is several of us presenters. My team is here along with my team member, Julia Beans, who is our partner. She's actually one of our whole community inclusion emergency management partners here, and also a wonderful resource available for the state of Colorado. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do some quick rounds of introduction and go around the room. I'm going to start with Julia, then I'm going to go to Gabby.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Julia Beams. I'm with the University of Colorado Denver Center for Inclusive Design and Engineering. And we provide information and training around all the assistive devices that people with disabilities use. So we are the state assistive technology program, and happy to be here and happy to have you all join us.
This is Sadie. We're going to go to Gabby, then we'll go to Tim.
All right. Hi, this is Gabby. Good morning. My name is Gabby Roldan. I'm a part of the Colorado Access and Functional Needs Program team, and I work as a whole community inclusion funding specialist. And I'll hand it off to Tim.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabby. This is Tim. I am part 2 of the whole community inclusion planning specialists, and I'm very excited to be here.
Yay. We'll go to Caitlin, and then we'll go to Eric Aguilar.
My name is Caitlin Garco. I'm the Access and Functional Needs temp aide.
Thank you, Caitlin. Eric, then we'll go to Tina.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Aguilar, coming to you live from Fontana, California. I am a CERT instructor, LISAS instructor for Access and Functional Needs. And as we speak, I'm being recruited to the Self-Advocacy Statewide Network for the next 4 years. I am glad to be here.
Okay, thank you, Eric. We'll go to Tina and then Donna.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tina Strang, and I work for an area agency on aging, Region 12, which is the Resort Mountain region in Colorado.
Yay, welcome. All right, let's go to Donna, and then we'll go to Rob.
I'm Donna Weehee. I'm the Director for Communications and the PIO for San Luis Valley Health. It's a health system in the southern part of Colorado. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. We're going to go to Rob, then Logan.
Hi, I'm Rob Farino, La Plata County Emergency Management Coordinator.
Thank you, Rob. All right, we're going to go to Logan, then we're going to go to Shauna.
How's it going? My name is Logan Montoya. I am the San Luis Valley EPR Generalist. We provide professional guidance and advice to 6 counties regarding emergency preparedness and response.
Yay, thank you, Logan. All right, we're going to go from Logan to Shauna to Stephanie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Shauna Lagarza. I'm Director of Emergency Management for La Plata County. Thanks for having us.
Yay, this is Sadie. Lots of that southeast region southeast, right? Southwest region showing up here in San Luis Valley. Yay. Thank you. All right, Shauna or Stephanie, and then Jesslyn.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie. I'm with Alamosa County. I'm the EPR coordinator. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, we'll go to Jesslyn, then Kate.
Good morning. I'm Jesslyn Mulder. I'm the with Summit County Human Services and as an admin assistant, and I do a lot of the emergency management.
Thank you, Jesslyn. All right, Kate, then Ken. Kate Stafford, if you're talking, we cannot hear you. All right, we're gonna go to Ken and then T Master. Oh, did Ken leave? Ken might have left. All right, we'll go to T Master, then we'll go to Priya.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tenny Masterson, and I am Director of Operations for SLV Health at Conejos County Hospital, and I'm also on our Healthcare Coalition and a member of our Emergency Preparedness Committee.
Awesome, yay, all right, and then Priya, then Heather.
Hi, everybody. My name is Priya Penner, and I'm with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, a national nonprofit that focuses on people with disabilities and access and functional needs before, during, and after disasters.
Yay, nice to have you, Priya. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
All right, and then we'll go to Heather.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heather. I am the Access and Functional Needs Coordinator for the Division of Emergency Management, Nevada.
Yay, thank you. So we have a few people from out of state on here. Kate Stafford, I believe you are from Utah. If you could put that in the chat also, that would be great as well, if your mic is not working. Yay, how exciting. We have a great also partnership to be part of this discussion. We are really going to be showing you a menu of options that we offer here in Colorado, and then we're going to talk about the process in it. And I'm just going to put a real simple way of being able to receive this. So as you're going through all of the information that we're going through, you'll be able to align it with that. This is a state-supported training to help you in your local jurisdictions on helping include that the whole community inclusion of supporting people with disabilities and access and functional needs when resources are needed before, during, and after emergencies and disasters. So that's a great, quick, high level of information there. And so what we also want to identify is that Colorado's way of doing business is we don't want to wait for like lawsuits, and we don't want to, and we want to break down the us versus them, the pointing of fingers where we're saying, hey, you were supposed to and you didn't. We're going to come together so we can seek to understand. So everybody is identifying what their CMIST resource needs are, and not having to identify their demographic or identify as a person in certain demographics, which sometimes leaves people out of receiving resources. We want to be able to identify the actual resource need and be able to get that to the individual in order to save as much life and property. We want to also in our program, we are helping people to plan with, respond with, and recover with. And by doing that, it's why we should care about this. We want to really have that plan with approach versus a plan for, and then we miss out on things that we don't know because we don't have a lived experience, or we don't work to support community members who are normally under-resourced or underserved. And so with that, next slide, please.
So this is Julia. We want to make sure that you all understand that we are here to provide information only to you on what you might have guidance on. We are not the AFM police, so we are not here to tell you or to do lawsuits against you. We are just strictly here for information. Next slide.
I call that, this is Sadie, I call that the how-to. We're your how-to people resource on how to do what you're doing in your emergency management. So with that, we're going to hand it over to Gabby. Or Caitlin, sorry, Caitlin.
Okay. Okay, so some inclusive meeting practices we like to follow are to say your name and organization when you begin to speak to help build relationships. Respect pronouns and names that individuals use for themselves. Make no assumptions about what people know. Speak slowly, one at a time with clarity and volume. Take breaks as needed to allow interpreters to catch up. Beware of using acronyms. Provide captions or scripts for visuals. And provide materials in different formats. And then practice 1, 2, 3. So if you're someone who likes to talk all the time, just count 1, 2, 3 in your head before you speak to give others the chance to speak. And then if you're someone who doesn't like to talk that much, you can also count 1, 2, 3 in your head to prepare yourself and then share. And this just encourages everyone to contribute.
This is Gabby. So I know that we've been living in a virtual hybrid world for quite some time now, but we do like to include some housekeeping for virtual platforms, but with the consideration that there is a chance that everyone might already be aware of how to use the Zoom platform. I just want to give an opportunity before I go over the next few slides to skip those next few slides. So please feel free to unmute, put in the chat, or raise your hand if you'd like some for us to go over the how-tos to change the Zoom how-tos, really.
So this is Sadie. So like Team Master, Tina, I think that's your name, right, Tina? Do you?
It's actually Tenny, like tennis shoe.
Oh, Tenny. Oh, cool. I'm sorry. I thought I
worries.
heard it, but I was awesome.
I get all kinds of fun stuff.
Tenny, do you know how to change your name in the Zoom platform?
No, I've not done that before.
All right, that helps us right now because we are going to go ahead and go over this slide then.
Okay,
Go
perfect.
ahead.
Perfect, yeah, and so kind of like Caitlin had mentioned with the inclusive meeting practices and how really, even though we are kind of in a virtual session, we really want to make sure that we have the opportunity to build relationships. It's definitely important to have our name up next to our video picture when we are in the Zoom virtual platform. So to change your name in Zoom, once you're in the Zoom meeting, you can click on the participants button at the top of the Zoom window, or you can click and hover over your own individual box. And from there, you'll be able to click either your name in the participants pop-out box. And when you hover over your name, you can rename yourself. Or if you want to hover over your video picture and click the 3 white dots inside of the blue box in the right-hand corner, you'll be able to drop down a new drop-down bar. And from there, you can go, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's the 9th one down, the very bottom option, and you can rename yourself, type in your correct or accurate name, and you can click OK. And so then that way, while we're participating in the Zoom meeting, everybody will know who you are, and you'll know who everybody else is.
Okay. And with that, this is Sadie. Our next slide is going to talk about all of the different icons. Are there any icons that anybody is not familiar with, such as the reactions? We use the reactions a lot here, such as if you have to leave, if you will turn on your coffee cup, so we know you're gone and we don't call on you. And then we always use some of those reactions to help us better understand that. If everybody is feeling comfortable with this, if you will go ahead and use a reaction so we could say skip this slide. All right, we are going to go ahead and skip the slide. Please feel free to go in the chat, and you can personally send it to any of us, co-hosts or hosts, and we will send you the information in chat for that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and skip real quick. For those who benefit for closed captioning or the captioning, at the bottom there is back one slide. There is a CC at the bottom. If you would like to go ahead and turn that on, I use it all the time because it helps me keep up, and also if words I don't hear. So if you'll go ahead and turn those on, if you'll benefit from those. All right. And go ahead 2 slides. All right, we are going to go over, we're going to have a 2-hour course here. We do not have breaks scheduled in, so we are going to encourage you to go ahead and take breaks as needed. you are in a hybrid or in a virtual platform, please feel free to take breaks as needed. If we get a chance to get a break, we will try to do that at the top of the hour. Right now, we just don't have that scheduled in. We're getting better at that, but we also want to encourage you to take breaks as needed. And we are recording this, so if you missed anything, we will send the recording out. It'll be available for you. We'll get it into a YouTube video, and then with the captioning and everything, so that you will be able to do that. All right. We are going to have 8 modules that we're going to talk about. We may not be able to get into module 8 where or we might. It depends on how much time we have. That is an exercise to help us better identify CMIST resources and how would we respond as a CMIST response team. Just trying to feel what we're doing with this this menu of options. But the first module, we're going to talk about the problem. Module 2, we're going to talk about the whole community concept and why it's important. Module 3, we'll talk about executive actions and legislation. Module 4 is the solution. Module 5 is access and functional needs framework and the CMIST memory tool. Module 6 will be the CMIST response teams. Module 7 is talking about how all the partners work together during an emergency. And then also some of the areas of focus that each of these emergency support partners come together on. And then module 8 is the actions and next steps. And then if we have time, we'll be able to do the exercise. All right. So we're going to start with the problem. But before we get started, are there any questions so far? All right, not hearing any. I always do an awkward 10 seconds or 5 seconds. It's awkward for me because I like to talk. And so I have to do that 1, 2, 3 portion of that. So just want to make sure. All right, so we're going to talk about the problem. We're going to talk about past disasters and lessons learned. And then we're also going to talk about laws and are you following them? And then lawsuits, the real stories and statistics, and the problems identified during response, recovery, and real story statistics. And so we're going to start here on talking about Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina was the wake-up call to emergency management and how we respond to threats, right? We want to make sure that we're not only looking at active threat or terrorist threats. We want to also look at all hazards threats and how it leaves people behind when we don't plan with our community. I'm listening to a book right now called Heat Wave, and I'm trying to better understand lessons learned from even the heat wave. And it also talks about Hurricane Katrina being a wake-up call when it comes to natural disasters. But really what we want to identify here is the headline. It says 38% did not evacuate because they had a disability or were caring for an individual with a disability. And so the people who died were people with disabilities, people who were caring for people with disabilities. And so we really want to note that that this is also very similar to some of the headlines, even fast forwarding, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. Some of the lessons learned from Katrina, however, is also lesson learned, and then we didn't continue to improve that process. So we wanted to talk a little bit about lessons learned from Katrina, and what it was is that it resulted in the adoption of FEMA's whole community concept for disaster planning. This is where those emergency support function partners started coming together and working together to try to make sure that people weren't left behind. And in Katrina, we also identified that shelter staff were not prepared to support people with access and functional needs, and they had no idea where to turn for help. And so what we're wanting to do is really bring together people resources, community connectors, trusted members of the community to better help in times of before, during, and after disasters. We fast forward to 2017. Next slide, please. 2017 Hurricane Harvey. And the headline again is after Hurricane Harvey, disaster relief efforts are failing people with disabilities. Again. All right, so if we keep repeating history from 2005 to 2017 to 2020 where we keep repeating history, obviously we are missing something. And so here in Colorado, we want to try to fill that gap, and across the nation. However, we are in Colorado, so we're going to really speak to Colorado specific. However, please, any of you in different states, or if you support any nationally, please make sure to carry whatever can help you as you plan with and in your efforts of ensuring people are not left behind. We talk about this headline, and it's an example of what we want to look at. How can we save lives and not keep continue repeating history? We want to look forward and how to try to get it right. We partnership with our partners at the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies for our Access and Functional Needs Conference. And what I love about it is it's called the Getting It Right Conference, right? It's getting it right. It's because we're trying to get it right. And what are we getting right? And we keep chipping away at that and keep repeating it so it's not lost. So we fast forward to 2017, we're repeating history again in the headlines, and then we go to 2018. Next slide. And this headline, Campfire 2018. In California wildfire, disabled people may be left behind. Campfire, many who died in California wildfire were disabled and elderly. Could they have been saved? We don't want to have those headlines here. We want to try to do work prior to, so that we save as much life and property. We care about our community. We want to have that planned with approach. With that, any questions? Next slide. All right, any comments? All right, well, we're going to move on to module 2, and Tim is going to take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sadie. This is Tim. So Sadie mentioned FEMA's introduction of the whole community concept following Hurricane Katrina. And module 2, what we're going to talk about is what it is and why it's important, just so that we have that framework for what it is. So if we go to the next slide, we have the definition boiled down to its most fundamental here on the slide of what the whole community concept is from FEMA. And what it is looking at identifying the actual resource needs of the community members along with who they are, that regardless of their age, their socioeconomic background, or any of their accessibility requirements. Because when you're in that planning stage, you need to be able to understand what someone is going to need, both on a day-to-day basis in the clear sky days, as well as when that disaster or that event happens. So because of this whole community concept, we are moving towards a resource focus of what is it that someone needs in order to function in an emergency versus who are you? What is the label that you have in the emergency? Are you a person with a disability? Okay, that could be any number of things. So by engaging with the whole community and actually learning who they are and what their individual needs are, you're much better able to plan for what those resources are going to be necessary in the time of that emergency. So moving to the next slide, why it's important. It really helps build that understanding of your community. And by understanding who you live with, who you serve in that community, and what resources they need, you are now building that competence and you're building that resilience within the community. And by bringing those same people to the planning table, by really integrating them into that planning process, you're helping give them agency in that emergency, and by being able to help them really feel like they are able to be prepared in the disaster. And then beyond just engaging the individual members of your community, you also are looking at engaging your faith-based organizations, your community leader agencies, your healthcare coalitions. You really want to get the entire community, because by doing that, you're able to not only understand the resource needs of the community, both the individual members and the agencies that you're working with and serving, but you're also able to actually understand the capacity and what people are able to help with in that emergency, whether that is a resource or manpower, however they are able to support within that emergency. And in doing that, you're going to strengthen all of the processes that already are working well in the community, because now you're identifying those capacities and you're identifying those resources, both what you have available and the capacity, as well as what the need is in those emergencies. And we will be going over the CMIST resource needs, which is that memory tool that we use to identify what resources are actually needed in the emergency. So in this next slide, just continuing the discussion of what makes or why whole community inclusion is so important. Just from a conceptual standpoint, we're trying to foster that understanding of who is included and highlighting the diversity of the community, both in terms of background, in terms of access needs or resource needs, and really looking to build your community's emergency plan around ensuring that all members of your community are able to be included and receive the effective communication when necessary, whether that be through text alerts, whether that be through a PSA on the radio, or having an interpreter next to the press release during the emergency communication press release. And by doing this, by really integrating that whole community concept, it ties back into Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is going to further increase and ensure that equal access to programs, making sure that facilities allow for physical accessibility. And again, that effective communication, as well as being able to provide reasonable accommodations when necessary. And beyond that, by maintaining that commitment to whole community inclusion and ensuring that effective communication, what you're able to do is also tie into Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, because you're accounting for the technological needs of your community. Sadie or Gabby, would you have anything to add to that before we move on?
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions about what we talked about? Fantastic. Well, Julia, I'll toss it to you for module 3.
Great. So in this section, we are going to be discussing the executive actions and legislations. So we said before that we are not the ADA police, but we do feel like you do need to understand some of the guidance and legislation that is out there. So let's go to the next slide, please. So in your handouts that you get, we have the executive action orders reference list so that you can refer back to those. So we have a list of public notices that you might want to look into further. So we have Executive Order 13347, and that was put out after Katrina to make sure that individuals with disabilities were actually included in emergency preparedness. That's one of the big things that we found, is that individuals had not received appropriate training or information on what they need to do to take some personal responsibility for themselves. And then we have the FCC making televised emergency information accessible to viewers with disabilities. So one of the things that we found is that all those emergency messages we get on our TV were not accessible to everyone. The people with a vision loss could not see the information being scrolled across the top of the TV. Individuals who were deaf or hard of hearing who were not looking directly at their TV screens might not know that something was on the screen because they have those weird noises going on at the beginning of those alerts. And so all that information now has to be accessible to everyone. And then in 2009, FEMA developed and opened an Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, so that they have specific people in the office and at the regional level now who focus specifically on individuals with access and functional needs, and are key in helping us make sure that those people are included in all of our plans and included in all the programs and services that are being provided. So in Region 8, we have Mike Houston, and every other region also has one as well. And so they are great partners for us to be working with. Next slide, please. American Disabilities Act. And
Julia, this is Sadie. You cut out just a few seconds. Can you start all over on this slide real quick?
Sure. Sorry about that. So most of us have heard about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed back in 1990. So it's been around quite a while. And it provides legislation and the inclusion of people with disabilities in all areas of their life and helping make sure that we are planning for them in association with our emergency plans. So there are multiple titles to the legislation. We have employment. So if we are hiring people, their work areas need to be accessible. They need to have accommodations so that they can do the jobs that they're hired to do. We have public services. So again, anything that we services that we're providing to the general public have to be accessible to individuals with disabilities. We have public accommodations. So that's where you see a lot of the accessible bathrooms and building entrances. And then we have the telecommunications relay services. So again, making sure that people are able to access information through their phones. So they have had multiple updates. So we've had the Amendments Act of 2000. We've had accessibility guidelines that have come out in 2010. And so again, our CMIST legislative executive order reference list has this information in more detail so you can go back and actually look at it. So how this relates to emergency management, again, is that everything that we do has to be accessible to people with disabilities. So whether it's our shelters, the information, our alerts, all that information has to be in accessible formats, transportation, if we're assisting with evacuation, all of our disaster assistance centers after the fact, all of those services that we are providing to everyone else has to be accessible to a person with a disability. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in some of the other legislation, I believe. Slide, please. So our good and promising practices. There was a document that was put out on preserving our freedom, ending institutionalization of people with disabilities during and after disasters. One of the things that we have found is when people had segregated some of the shelters. People were making determinations that somebody might need a little more medical help. They were being put into nursing homes or other types of institutions so that they could get the appropriate care of what they thought they might need. One of the things that we have found is that once a person goes into an institution, it can be very difficult to get them back out. And so we want to make sure that people are out of the institutions if they don't need to be in there. So this is not a law, but it is a guidance in trying to keep people out of those institutions. And it helps prepare with the CMIST resources to make sure that these people have what they need so they do not end up in the institution. So it's a really good document for everyone to follow. Next slide, please. So some of the lawsuits that we have actually experienced, there's been a lot of it. We've seen it in Los Angeles or in California and New York. So after some of the big fires, people had complained about the lack of planning for people with disabilities. We see that over and over. And again, like Sadie said earlier, when we started out with Katrina and then the Paradise fires, I mean, we kept seeing over and over again that people with disabilities were the ones that are not being rescued. They're being harmed more than others. And part of that is the lack of planning that was going on to include these individuals. And so we want to make sure that everyone is being considered. Again, we saw this again in New York City and with some of the different hurricanes. So it's really important to make sure that we are including these people so we don't see the lawsuits. And the lawsuits are being brought by specifically individuals with disabilities who felt like they weren't treated equally as everyone else. And so just information to in the back of your hat. Again, we've got the list of all the litigation and laws that you can refer to. And I would suggest you go in and read some of those. Next slide, please. So here in Colorado, we have not been exempt of some of these lawsuits. And so again, we want to make sure that your emergency operation plans comply with the Americans with Disability Act, and that you have included people with access and functional needs in your plan. There are best practices toolkits for people to follow that the ADA centers have put those out with very specific guidance, measurements, things you need to look at when you're planning some of your shelters or assistance centers. Also, some of the information is also there when you're looking at other services and providing information. So I know our ADA center provides lots of trainings. And so I would encourage you all to take those as much as you possibly can. And they've got some specific ones around the ADA and emergency management. And I know the Pacific ADA Technical Assistance Center has a specific group of trainings around emergency management, and you can sign those up and they're all free. But some other things you want to look at is physical changes to your emergency shelters. Again, making sure they're accessible. During the Waldo Canyon fire down in Colorado Springs, we had ramps that went into the shelters. Unfortunately, as people came into the shelters, they were riding their bikes and they chained their bikes to the ramps, and so they became inaccessible. So again, you have to have not only the accessibility features, but monitors to make sure that things stay accessible to everyone who's coming in and out. We also had shelters where the food access area was a couple of steps up, so it too was not accessible to everyone. Alerts, again, we need to make sure that they are accessible to people who may have low vision, may have hearing loss, may not be able to read, may not understand the language. All of those are big issues because we want to make sure that everyone is getting the information that they need. And so there might be some alternative ways for you to look at getting those messages out. I know we have some apps here in Colorado now. Reach Well is one of them that provides information in alternative languages, and people are able to sign up and receive the information in the language that they prefer. But also making sure that our alerts are accessible to those who are deaf or hard of hearing is very key. So making sure those distributions or your emergency alert messages are going out. One of the things we look at with alerts, like I said, not everyone is literate or is able to read those messages. And so making sure you're putting things in simple language, or if you can use any sort of pictures or videos to help get that message out. You can have interpreters that pre-record messages if at all possible so that you can get those out. So looking at some alternative formats and ways to get that information out. Looking at evacuation plans, again, making sure that people have access to transportation to evacuate if at all possible. People may have vehicles, but may not have fuel to get out at the last minute. So making plans for those. We want to make sure that people are including service animals in their plans and making accommodations for those. I have heard recently that Red Cross is going to be allowing all animals into their shelters. And so they are making plans that they have not done that, as I understand, just yet, but they are in the planning stages because we have seen lots of discrimination with service animals, and we've also seen fraudulent animals brought in as service animals. And so making sure that those dogs and miniature ponies are the only service animals that are there. But if people are bringing in pets, making sure that you have accommodations for those as well. Another area for lawsuits is the accessible post-emergency temporary housing, making sure that that is available to everyone. I know one of the issues that we've seen, not only making sure that they are physically accessible, but also for people maybe during the summer where heat is an issue, making sure that they have the appropriate air conditioning or cooling systems available so that they can live in those places successfully. And again, so for more information, you can go to the ADA Protect Civic Action Access Report, and you can get more information that way. Next slide, please. So some of the real life experiences and lessons that we have learned. We talk about using sign language interpreters. In Colorado, we make sure all of our interpreters are certified. We want to make sure that individuals are qualified to provide the information that is being given. We have seen multiple examples of individuals volunteering or being asked to interpret when they really don't know all the language that should be used. And so we see people who are using their own signs or their finger spelling and really getting the wrong message out there. So it's really important to make sure that our interpreters are certified. And so we have seen from who was our former FEMA administrator. He states that my experience tells me if we wait and plan for people with disabilities after we write the basic plan, we fail. And so making sure that you are planning ahead of time to make sure that you've got the appropriate services available. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. After the Waldo Canyon fire here in Colorado, the Independence Center down there in Colorado Springs, they wrote up a summary of their findings along with the Rocky Mountain ADA Center, indicating all the lack of planning that had been done. And so the accessibility was not addressed for a lot of our consumers. Next slide, please.
Julia, real quick, this is Sadie. We do have the video for those if we want, if you want to show those examples, you're welcome to do that. The other thing that we would add on this one is the picture on the top right with an American Sign Language interpreter in a yellow shirt was somebody who spoke used an American Sign Language that it was only understandable by the family member. And in that, because that emergency manager didn't know what they didn't know about using certified American Sign Language interpreters, had asked if there was anybody in their office that knew American Sign Language. Well, this gentleman knew how to sign, but was not a certified American Sign Language interpreter. And so he's a brother of somebody who was deaf, and their sign was understandable to each of the family member, but not as to the rest of other people who use American Sign Language in their everyday life. And so just want to give you that example as it could be tempting when you know somebody who signs. I know very little sign, and I try to sign with people who are deaf that I learned from sign with, and even my sign was incorrect. And so for somebody to say, hey, does anybody know sign? And then I step up, really puts our community in a bad situation, as well as people being able to receive effective communication. So just that I bring that up, and it looks like Shauna, you might have a comment.
I do, thank you. I was just wondering if there's like a database of certified American Sign Language folks in Colorado, or, you know, how could we as emergency managers find some of that for our areas? Do you know?
Sadie, yep, and I will drop that into the chat. We work with our Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, Deaf Blind here in Colorado, and they have a directory on their website. So I'm going to pull that up. These are certified ASL interpreting agencies that they have on their website. And the reason why we're recommending going to them is they are the subject matter expert when it comes to American Sign Language and using that resource. Julia, would you add anything else on that?
Well, we are going to go over our one of our teams that is specifically for the interpreters. We'll go over that later. But yes, they definitely have all passed the certification so that we can ensure that they are providing you with the accurate information. So as Sadie said, I mean, we had people who, not here in Colorado, but in these other states where they had provided misinformation about the event that was going on. There was a shooter that it wasn't expressed correctly. And so people had no idea the seriousness of the matter. And so we want to make sure that our interpreters exactly what's going on. Any other questions? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we just talked about the ASL interpreters. We want to make sure that they are at all the disaster briefings they're at the shelters, they're at our disaster assistance centers. Really trying to make sure that we have covered ourselves and making sure that that information is available to each and every one of us as we may come in. Speakers and microphones are being used. Again, in a large meeting where there's lots of people talking, you want to make sure that you have a microphone and speaker system so that everyone can hear. Not everyone is going to self-identify as having a hearing loss. And so you want to make sure that you have that available to make sure everybody hears. I know when I go into large rooms and things, sometimes I don't always hear everything. And so this is just a great way to ensure that everyone is getting the information that they need. Other languages, I know here in Aurora, we have a multitude of languages that are spoken, as well as in Colorado. And so we try to make sure that we have language interpreters available as well. But again, knowing your area, you will know what languages are being spoken at and what you might need to have. Some other concerns for our shelters, everybody wants a bariatric cot. So making sure that those are available. And I know a lot of our emergency managers have purchased bariatric cots, or the regions have them. And so we have some available, but planning ahead to make sure that you have some of those available. Transportation, again, making sure that we have accessible transportation, that we're not just sending out vehicles to pick up people to help with evacuation. We want to make sure that the drivers of the vehicles are not only able to drive the vehicle, but they're trained in the use of the lifts that may be used. We have had incidents where the lift has broken down and the driver did not know how to override it or fix it or hack into it to make sure that it did work, or find the manual way to operate it. And so again, transportation is huge, making sure that it is accessible. And again, maybe looking at some fuel costs or other transportation options that people might have, using public transportation and providing vouchers for them to use them. Are there other examples that you all have experienced and learned from?
This is Sadie. Priya, do you mind sharing any of your examples? We learn a lot from you, and so I just wondered if you might have some examples.
This is Priya Sadie putting me on the spot. Here I was ready to learn from you guys. I think that just really reiterating the importance of effective communication during disasters. You guys talked a lot about how to provide equally effective communication. And we just see time and time again, people not knowing where to go, not knowing what's happening because that information is not effective. So really, really highlighting the importance of that, as well as, and to be very specific, as well as the importance of ASL interpreters, not only at disaster briefings, but also in sheltering and other areas that people need to communicate, but is not necessarily provided or thought of, I want to say, ahead of time. And of course, I just really going off of what you guys are saying, because you're hitting the nail on the head. Transportation is another thing that we at the partnership see as a huge barrier when a disaster hits. We have a number of calls to our disability and disaster hotline where folks just don't know how to evacuate and don't know how to find information on accessible transportation, partially because that transportation was not accessible in the first place. So then we as the partnership are working with local emergency management officials to jerry rig some situation, maybe, and or working with the individual to see what resources they have or connections, et cetera, they might have to make it happen. I think those are the real, big areas that we find within our hotline work that I think if emergency managers could get ahead of, that would really help individuals from the beginning.
This is Sadie Priya. I really appreciate you talking about the transportation portion of that. Yesterday, we were doing a preparedness, a preparedness for a youth forum for people with disabilities. And we were given some of those tips, and we were talking about we need to look at our resource needs and know how to be able to communicate that before, during, and after an emergency. And one of the things that was brought up is like, all right, we have about 7 people here at this facility that need transportation and they have mobility issues. All right. If we say mobility issues, again, people who don't speak or understand that language, like emergency management, we're not able to really identify. However, if I'm able to say, hey, I normally use paratransit, there are 7 individuals here as well that use paratransit, and we need to be evacuated, that emergency manager and 911, whoever is getting that information, now they're able to identify the exact resource versus trying to plan for somebody and what looks good. Hey, I'm sending you a school bus. Well, the school bus only can take maybe two people in a wheelchair, and we're needing more wheelchair accessibility for that evacuation. And if we're able to bring a paratransit bus that can move, that can allow at least 4 people in a wheelchair, now we know we need at least 2 of those buses in order to help evacuate those individuals with their life-saving resource, the wheelchair, which is helping a person be able to mobilize from point A to point B. And so I love that you're training, or you brought that, so that we could also help individuals in their individual preparedness as they work with the systems of emergency preparedness, better identify the actual resource need versus just saying my demographic need in times of emergencies and disasters. The other thing I would also highlight as lessons learned, Julia, is in exercises, full-scale exercises in my community where there's evacuation or sheltering exercises, that we exercise it correctly, not just not just like making up the scenario. For instance, I went to I was an evaluator for a shelter exercise portion in another state, and in the shelter, I did not see anything that would help people with disabilities or others with access and functional needs who would not identify as having a disability, such as a person who had diabetes. If they were to walk into that shelter, the only options of snacks that they had available were all with sugar. And so it was not a real life opportunity to really demonstrate or see where they could do better, or also the areas of development when we were planning for in a very whole community inclusive mindset. So that was the feedback that I gave back to them and gave them resources to better identify how to get better at being inclusive, especially when you're asking, the only question you're asking as a person comes to a shelter is, do you have a disability? And then we miss out on so many other people who need access to resources in order to function during that emergency. So Priya, thank you. And thank you for letting me put you on the spot. And any other examples now that I've kind of triggered some more conversation there.
This is Priya. Sadie, thank you so much. I think it's just really important to, as a best practice, to be really just open to conversation throughout the process. I hear your examples, and what I'm really noticing throughout is, communicating with the people on the ground on ways to get better before the disaster happens. And so you guys are already doing that for joining us, joining this conversation. That's already part of the process. But it's important to take what you've learned here and continue the conversation with people who are going to be in charge of the sheltering, with people who are going to be in charge of all the other aspects, because we find that everything's just so siloed. So you might give suggestions, you might have suggestions, but others aren't willing to necessarily receive that information. And so that causes barriers for people with disabilities trying to access these life-saving sheltering and other needs. And again, just that conversation is so important.
This is Sadie. Thank you. I call that we don't know what we don't know. So when we get to have that conversation, we learn what we don't know by those subject matter experts, the ones with lived experience. So yay, thank you. All right.
Julia. So one of the things that we don't ever really talk about are the people with the invisible disabilities. Like Sadie was talking about, people with diabetes. There are all kinds of people who are out there with invisible disabilities. And so you can't judge that ahead of time. Something else, Eric mentioned that if you don't know how to use sign language, to use pencil and paper. So when you're looking at the shelters or disaster centers, one of the things you want to look at is all the low tech solutions that you might want to consider to have available. Because if you're going to have an interpreter, it may take them a while to get there, and you may have people show up before the interpreter. And so making sure you have ways to communicate on a very simple level before the interpreter may get there. So whether it be pen and paper or dry erase boards, making sure that you have that option available before you get started. Other examples or questions?
This is Priya. I just want to add that to the ASL interpreting conversation, add that these low tech options are absolutely an option for short encounters, but it is so important to have ASL interpreters, and especially certified ASL interpreters, when you're having a longer in-depth conversation, especially if you're talking about needing to move somebody to a different location or whatever the need may be. Pen and paper absolutely is a great option for if you're just showing someone where the bathroom is, or short encounters like that.
Yeah, we also talk about some of the different types of communication boards that are out there. And they are great in a short instance, but they are not always culturally appropriate. I know we talk about using pain scales with people. And in some cultures, showing those expressions of pain are being perceived as weak, and so they're not going to do that. And so again, just knowing who your audience is, knowing what's out there, but also in a pinch, you can make something work on the short time until you get a full-fledged, and whether it be a language interpreter or a sign language interpreter on the scene. Any other questions or comments?
Just Sadie, I just saw a comment in the chat about people with individual disabilities. That's a tough one. And our recommendation with that is just ask. At least asking will help us get there, because that's a planned with approach versus saying, oh, you know what, somebody with who is deaf said that they have a disability, let's bring them a wheelchair. They don't need that resource. So by just asking, because somebody who's deaf, normally it's an invisible disability. You're not able to see it right away. And so that's what we refer to that. But that is just my final comment on that. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, that's next slide, which I think is questions. So I think we can, unless anybody has any additional questions, we can move on to the next unit or module.
All right, this is Gabby. So for module 4, we're going to talk a little bit about the solution and working towards getting it right. We did just discuss the problem. We discussed historical events and real life experiences and lessons learned. But now what we want to do is assure that those lessons learned are moved into working towards getting it right and taking bites out of the whole to assure that we don't repeat past events and we really apply those lessons learned. And in the previous conversation, we actually did have some of our conversation kind of intertwined with some of these drivers, themes, and trends for CMIST response teams. So growing cultural diversity and an increasing aging population makes it ever more important that voices be heard. With different cultures and with our increasing aging population, there are varying considerations to take into account, and CMIST response teams can help guide this effort. For impact of disasters, natural or man-made, we have to plan, respond, and recover from these disasters, even if, say, they change season to season. Right now, it seems like weather patterns are changing a lot, but we need to make sure that even if the disaster is changing, we're still prepared. We discussed some of the laws, and so for that, laws, principles, and compliance, CMIST response teams are really an opportunity for understanding and attaining the how-tos tied to the laws, the principles, and the compliance. And then in addition, we have limited financial and human resources or drivers for CMIST response teams, as well as economic impact and mitigation of disasters. And I'll ask Julia, Tim, or Sadie if you have anything to add before we move on from this one. Sounds good. And this is Gabby. So really the solution is understanding CMIST. So that acronym that we are going to really go into, I know we talk about not using acronyms, but understanding CMIST, C-M-I-S-T. So what is it? The solution can be the CMIST response team and the mission of the CMIST response team. What CMIST response teams can do, their really whole purpose. It's understanding how to apply the variety of CMIST response teams within your community and within communities in general. The solution is to find ideal partners and fill specific CMIST response team roles. Who can bring what to the table and who already currently does. And so really, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these areas so that we can attain that solution. And does anybody have any comments or questions?
Hello, this is This is Tenny Masterson. I'm sorry, I got interrupted. Can you go back to the slide for just a minute or so with the 6 solutions? There we go. Thank you. I appreciate that.
This is Sadie. You're welcome. Did you get a screen grab of it, or do we need to put it into the chat?
So I'm trying to get my computer working here so I can do a screen capture of it. So thank you.
You're welcome. We could also do that.
I believe I got it. Thank you very much.
Yay. Next module, please.
Okay, so this is Caitlin, and I'm going to talk about access and functional needs and CMIST. So access and functional needs are defined as community members who need access to CMIST resources in order to function during emergencies and disasters. And on the next slide, I will talk about what exactly CMIST resources are. So with this, we want to focus on what disruption to CMIST resources a disaster could cause. This framework allows us to identify the CMIST resources we need and our community to identify the CMIST resources they require so that we can better prepare. So about 20% of people self-identify that they have a disability, and then about 70% of people are the actual community in need of CMIST resources in order to function during an emergency or disaster. So does Sadie, Gabby, or Tim, do you have anything else to add to access and functional needs?
This is Sadie. I would talk about that when we use the word special needs, and we think of people, the name for people with special needs, and we make it access and functional needs, we leave behind the majority of the community that needs access to resources. And so what I would add here is usually 1 in 5 people self-identify that they are a person with a disability. And then there's all the other people with disabilities that do not self-identify as having a disability. For instance, I have many family members that have diabetes that do not identify as having a disability. And the resource that they need in order to function is the correct food to maintain their blood sugar levels. And so when they have to self-identify as a person with a disability, then they are left out. So they are left behind in the idea of what resources they need in order to function during that emergency or disaster. And so that's what this infographic really tries to identify, is that is that when we look at the needs of people who need access to resources in order to function, that's where it's the majority of the whole community. There are those that already have all their resources, and that's about 10%, right? Because during emergencies and disasters, we normally leave a lot of that stuff behind if we did not plan correctly. So that's all I would add for that one, Caitlin. Any others?
Okay, so moving on to CMIST. So it's important to know and understand your community's demographic profile in order to determine what services and equipment will be needed in a disaster or an emergency. So caring for people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs is vital towards inclusive planning and inclusion. And this has been mandated in federal, state, territorial, tribal, and local emergency plans by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the CMIST strategy is a beneficial model for planning and organizing information to ensure needed services are provided to the entire population. So CMIST is a memory tool for the purpose of emergency planning, preparedness, response, and recovery. CMIST is utilized to help people remember and include the 5 functional resource needs individuals may have in an emergency or disaster. So those 5 resource needs are communication, maintaining health and medical, independence, support services and safety, and transportation. So the CMIST approach is based on a functional needs framework. It identifies people's actual needs during an emergency and identifies people with temporary needs, or those who do not identify themselves as having a disability. People might have limitations in the areas of seeing, hearing, speaking, moving, breathing, understanding, and learning.
This is Sadie. I would just add that this is a memory tool. We use that just so that we always think of, especially when we're in the event, that what is CMIST or what are my resources. And I will tell you that I got an evacuation notice about 2 months ago. I can't remember. And the very first thing I thought of is CMIST. What do I need in order to function? Everything else can be left behind. And so I just grabbed our maintaining health, all of our my husband's prescriptions, any of the resources that he needs in order to function. He uses a CPAP machine. It's a life-saving resource. Had I left it behind, we wouldn't have been able to replace that in time for that evening when he would have needed it. And so it's important that we think of those resources before and we know what's going with us at the time of the event. So I just want to really emphasize using that as a memory tool. Thank you, Caitlin.
Okay, so the access and functional needs framework suggests there are resources everyone needs during emergencies, regardless of who we are. So this means that everyone needs access to resources in order to function during emergencies. And CMIST helps to identify actual resource needs during an emergency, rather than labeling people as special needs or vulnerable populations. So for that first CMIST resource, which is communication. So some individuals have difficulties with the receipt and response to information, and we will need that information provided in methods that they can understand and use. And this is especially true in regards to alerting and notification. Individuals may have difficulty hearing verbal announcements, seeing directional signs, or understanding how to get assistance due to either hearing, vision, speech, or cognitive processing, intellectual disabilities, and limited English proficiency. So for maintaining health and medical, individuals who are not independent or who do not have adequate support from caregivers, family, or friends may need assistance with managing unstable, terminal, or contagious conditions that require observation and ongoing treatment. They may also require assistance in managing activities of daily living, such as eating, dressing, grooming, transferring or using the restroom. Individuals may require support of trained medical professionals. And for independence, so individuals who maintain their independence based on routines and supports for daily living activities may lose this support during an emergency or disaster. So in a general population shelter, if individuals have their assistive devices or equipment, such as mobility, communication aids, or medical assistive technology or durable medical equipment, they can maintain their independence. And additionally, independence can also be maintained if individuals have access to consumable medical supplies, their assistive technology, their durable medical equipment, or their service animals. And there also may be a digital divide. So there could be people who do not have communication equipment or access where they live. So for support services and safety, people with support needs may include those who have psychiatric conditions such as dementia, Alzheimer's, or severe mental illness, addiction, brain injury, or they become anxious due to trauma. So during an emergency, individuals may lose the support of caregivers, family, or friends, and they may be unable to cope in a new environment. And they may also require a more protective or supervised setting. And then lastly is transportation. So individuals who can't drive or they don't have a vehicle because of disability, age, injury, poverty, addiction, legal restriction, or just for any other reason they don't have access to a vehicle, they may require transportation support for successful evacuation. And during an evacuation, a wheelchair accessible transportation will be necessary, or information about how and where to access mass transportation during an evacuation. So is there anything else to add or any questions about CMIST or access and functional needs? Okay.
Sorry. So moving on to module 6, we want to look at the actual CMIST response teams. Many of you may have heard of the FAST teams that are used in multiple states, which is the functional assessment teams that actually go out. And we have taken those teams a step further. So we want to make sure that people are looking at all the resources during the whole process and not just during an event or after an event. So we are looking at response teams that are developed at the local community level, where members can be trained to help strengthen the community's resilience and can help by addressing, identifying specific resource needs in their area. But we're looking at doing that before, during, and after a disaster to ensure that whole community inclusion. So during the pandemic, we have found multiple examples of places where we might have needed additional responses. Just for interpreting, we found specific communities that were not getting the information in a format that worked for them. And so we want to make sure that these are all very local. Although we also understand that a local response, these individuals might be involved themselves. So they may have taken care of their own families. So looking at maybe regional response teams would make sure that you could cover everything if your specific response team was effective. Next slide, please. So again, the mission of our response teams are to maintain the independence and inclusion of visitors. Colorado is a definite tourist. Excuse me?
This is Sadie. Is she cutting out for others?
Yes.
Right. Julia, will you just go back? I interrupted you right at the section. If you could go back right there.
I apologize. They keep saying I have an unstable connection today, so just keep letting me know if I need to go back. So again, the mission is to help maintain independence and inclusion of all the community members and our visitors. Colorado is a tourist state, and so we want to make sure that whoever is in the area is included in our plans. And so that means planning for everyone and everything. We want to make sure that we are strengthening our local community disaster resilience, and that's how this team can help by helping us identify all these areas, and it allows individuals to receive equitable services during our response and recovery. So there's lots of ways that these response teams can be utilized. Next, please. So the purpose to help us identify and address any resource needs that may come up during a disaster response. We have local people who are trusted, who can go out into the community, who can help us identify those needs. It allows people to stay in that particular community instead of moving them and evacuating them to a different community where they may not be familiar and they may not have the support systems that they're used to having to provide services that they need. It also helps us to identify and strengthen those relationships and partnerships that are key in the response and making sure that, again, the whole community is included. And it also includes all of our local advocates, partners, stakeholders, and community subject matter experts who, again, are needed when we are right there in the midst of everything. Again, these people help us determine or learn what we don't know because we don't know. Next slide, please. So we have several areas of concentration. So we have different teams that focus on each area. So we look at one team providing on-site environmental accessibility assessments. These are people who are going in to make sure that the shelters or the disaster assistance centers are actually accessible to everyone. We have not only physical access, but the information is accessible. We have alternative providing that information. So again, this is one of the areas that we look at for preparedness and response, as well as recovery. We want to make sure that everything is going to be, or as much as we can prepare ahead of time, that everything will be accessible to individuals. The functional and needs assessment team is another area that we are looking at providing a team. And this is the one that a lot of people think about when they think about these response teams, because it is the on-site, in-person during the response. That's where we're actually working with all the individuals, looking at the types of resources that they are lacking so that we can help provide those so that they can continue to function independent and safe as possible. So again, that's the key, is trying to make sure people maintain their independence and safety during a response and after. A next team would be the information and technical assistance support. This is one where we have local members of the community vet the information that is being handed out. We want to make sure that people are getting information and not be sent on a wild goose chase. And so we want to make sure that the resources are safe. We want to make sure that they're appropriate. We have had some instances here after some of our large fires where people were coming in to provide spiritual support, and they actually were not providing what they were thinking about. I'm sorry, I'm doing a little bit more here. I guess they're jumping slides.
This is Sadie, because you were already identifying him and we weren't going forward with you. So we're now with you on the public information and technical.
Okay. So there's all kinds of information that we are looking at being vetted. So helping people find reliable, durable medical equipment suppliers, helping them get their pharmacy supplies, mental and emotional support. Again, we talk about the spiritual services, and we found that some of them were coming in and trying to get people to convert to their religion. And so that information had to be vetted. Who to go to restore the utilities, where to go to get financial assistance. A big one, of course, is home repairs. We see a lot of companies that will come in and try to get people to utilize them for their home repairs. Let's go to the next slide. Community outreach. Again, this is where it's really key for the local community to be involved, because it's up to you to decide what information you actually want to gather on, maybe helping identify some of the gaps and barriers that were experienced, and maybe some other information that you might have been missing. So we want to identify those lessons learned, information for our after action reports. That's the only way we can improve our response, is if we get this information into our after action reports and then we share that information. It does us no good just to collect information if we don't put them into practice. And so we want to make sure that all the information that we gather is shared. And again, this really helps us build our community competence in making sure that we are able to provide the services that are necessary for that specific region. Sadie, do you want to give any examples on your fires for force multipliers?
Sure, this is Sadie. Because of community outreach, not that it was formalized, however, because we started this opportunity between our partnership and those community connectors during the fires, we were able to, during our Marshall fire, our biggest fire ever in Colorado, we were able to quickly reach our community through our community connectors who we had a relationship because we started the conversation. And so people were not left out. And so I just want to make sure that we were sharing that information with you. Thank you to Julia. Anything else you want me to add to that?
Oh, that's good. Perfect. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the teams that we are currently working to pilot, hopefully it'll get started later this fall, is our emergency response interpreters. And that's where we are training our certified sign language interpreters and other language interpreters to be available at our shelters and centers, recovery centers, and at press conferences. Again, we're trying to make sure that people are available at all of these locations. We are currently working with our sign language interpreters to get them set up. And trying to get some contracts signed. So we have one agency that would help us provide those interpreters at the last minute and avoiding that 2-week wait. So what we're trying to do is work with our public information officers and joint systems and joint information center to make sure they know the appropriate through in requesting some of these interpreters. And again, this would come through management. Yeah.
We lost you at Joint Information Center, who we're working with, those partners, agencies.
I am so sorry.
No problem.
So again, we're working with our public information officers in the Joint Information System and the Joint Information Centers. We want to make sure that these individuals are aware of the procedures and requesting interpreters, and then it goes through the emergency manager to get those services. the interpreter is contracted with a partner agency. So we have interpreters that would be available across the state or be able to provide services through a video interpreter format. They would receive training every 2 years to maintain their certification or be available to provide this service. And they would need to maintain their own personal medical and liability coverage. So again, we're trying to make sure that the interpreters understand what their role is. It is not, because sometimes in the instant, people will ask them to do things that maybe they shouldn't. And
This
that
is
they
Sadie.
have a very specific role and responsibility.
This is Sadie, I'm just gonna repeat what she said because we broke up a little bit, but she was saying it's more about emergency response interpreters knowing what to do, their roles and responsibilities as they work with the public information officers and emergency managers during emergencies. That's a quick summary of what you just said.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide then. So as we have gone through some of these disasters or emergencies, we have found that we needed some other teams as well. And the media communications is one that we are looking at and working with our local broadcasters, our statewide broadcast association. They would help develop policies and procedures for the inclusion of language interpreters on the screens and use in the conferences, news conferences and disaster centers. And they would also help us in supporting our picture-in-picture use of interpreters for consistent inclusion of our ASL interpreters, making sure that they stay on the screen as well. So again, this would be a team that would be deployed during a response.
This is Sadie. I would just add on this one is that we had great plans for ASL interpreters and PIOs, but we had a plan for media and not with them. And so this media communications media communications CMIST response team is helping media better understand how to work with effective communication, ASL interpreters or other interpreters, as well as the public information officers, so that everything is consistent and people get the message quickly and effectively.
Perfect. Thank you. And then we're also looking at developing a business CMIST response team and helping our businesses utilize all of their resources to help people function when they need to. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we want you to mark or help us participate here. And the types of team members that you might think you would want to include in a CMIST team. We have a list of different agencies, but are there others that maybe we have not listed on here that you might want to include that are in your local area? Not all teams are going to look alike. Not all of our communities look alike, and we all have different groups that are there. But what would be some other agencies that we might want to add to our list or include?
This is Priya. The Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies is always a resource for folks looking to expand knowledge on the intersection of people with disabilities, those with access and functional needs and disasters. And I'm happy to put my contact information in the chat for folks who are interested in connecting with us.
Thank you. I know some of our people here in our state have participated in responses in other states as well. I mean, they've been some of the people that have connected with individuals and followed up with other agencies that maybe people.
This is Sadie.
Yeah.
This is Sadie. Donna and Tina has her hand up, and then Donna has put something in the chat also.
I was just thinking of home community-based services, home care and home health agencies might be aware of those with access and functional needs within the community.
Definitely, those home health agencies are definitely providers of services to these individuals. Donna, I don't know what your SBDC is.
It's an acronym. Can you help us there?
Small Business Development Centers.
Thank you,
Donna.
This is Tina again.
You know,
of adult daycare centers.
Oh, this is Sadie.
Perfect. Daycare. They would definitely have access to those individuals who need some additional assistance. We've got oxygen companies listed. Very good. Or finding oxygen companies that would be able to deliver across places. And so one of the things I know we have talked about is trying to find alternative ways of getting that oxygen, because if it's a major snowstorm, those delivery trucks are not going to make it. And I know down in the San Luis Valley, the hospital down there has the capacity of filling oxygen tanks if people need them. But it's a relationship I think the health department has with the hospital to make sure that people have some of those needs met. Other members you might want to include. No, this is, go ahead.
All right, this is Sadie. 211 call centers. Those are one of the most effective transportation resource partners also during times of disasters. And they are able to work with accessible transportation as well. So I just thought I'd throw that one out.
Yeah, that's one that we have found that will provide transportation services 24/7. So even in the evenings when maybe some of the other services aren't running, they have list of agencies that will provide that service. So not only do they provide information on transportation, but everything else as well. Thank you, Sadie.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So recruitment considerations. We've kind of talked about this a little bit earlier about the priorities and responsibilities during a response. Again, if the incident is large enough, your team members may be taking care of themselves or their families and not be available, or they may have responsibilities with other agencies or their employer. And so you need to make sure that you have at least considered that when you're recruiting different people or when they've signed up, making sure you understand when they would be available and under what circumstances. The other thing is to look at incorporating the response teams into existing volunteer responses. So the Medical Reserve Corps may also have people who would be interested who could serve double duty. Not only would they be there as the medical reserve volunteer, but they could also understand some of the CMIST responses and be able to fill in along those. There might be other volunteer agents that are out there as well. That other people know of some of those agencies? Yeah, some of the VOADs, they might be able to do that. The different spiritual or church organizations, they might be another good group to recruit from. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the team members' responsibilities. First of all, they need to have their own personal emergency plan. So if they have children in daycare and school, who's going to be taking care of those kids if somebody gets called out? You know, what might you need to plan for, making sure you have your own medications, your own communications plan. They would need to be deployed only when requested. It's not something that people can just show up for. They could help in the funding requests, making sure that people are getting the resources that they need. Maintaining their training. This is not a one and done type training when you have a specific CMIST response team training. You need to maintain the annual certification, and then we have other trainings that we look at for individuals when they are going to become a team member. Next slide, please. Some of the team trainings, again, we have the one-day response team trainings, then we're looking at quarterly optional trainings, annual research training, but also we would have some just-in-time online trainings that people could take. And then each jurisdiction is going to be able to decide other trainings that they may require individuals to have. So that may be shelter trainings, maybe CPR. It's like whatever the local jurisdiction may want to require. Next slide, please. So we do have a list of some prerequisites that we like people to have. You can see those here. So we have the FEMA independent study. So we have the 100, which is the intro to the incident command system. 7, an introduction to the National Incident Management System. The IS 368, including people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs into disaster operations. We want people to know how to fill out the 214 logs, so making sure that you've got that. We also provide the G197 here, integrating access and functional needs in emergency management, completing the MOU or MOAs if those are needed. And like I said, completing other jurisdiction trainings that people might require. So may or may not include additional trainings, but we want to make sure that you are getting the information that you need. Some of the other trainings that we have included are the ADA assessments, how to look at those, an overview of some of the assistive technology that's out there, and our community inclusion of Colorado maps, so that you know what some of your resources are. Gabby, you want to go ahead and explain this roadmap?
Yeah, thank you. Sounds good. So this is Gabby, and what we really want to emphasize with our CMIST response team roadmap is that we want CMIST response team members and community members that are thinking about being response team members and community leaders to know that this is not a one and done training, and we want to keep building the skill. So within the roadmap, there are the local requirements, the optional requirements. Roadmap kind of walks you through step 1, step 2, step 3. And these still are not set in stone. These could be added as new really great training opportunities come out. And so really what we just want to emphasize is that This is not one and done training. There are other opportunities that we want to encourage, growing skill sets. And then in each of the CMIST response team areas of concentration, we can go in and we'll discuss more of the specifics for that specific area of concentration.
Next slide. Julia, are you good?
I am. I'm sorry, my computer died for just a second. I seem more issues today. So we can look at the approval process. So the first thing we want people to do is fill out an application form so that they can express their interest, attend the team trainings that they are interested in providing. They need to verify at least 2 years of professional experience in one or more social service disciplines. So we don't want to eliminate people if they haven't had any experience that we don't recognize. There may be things out there that are available that we're just not aware of. They need to submit their background checks and proof that they've talked with their current employer that they can be deployed or their volunteer agency, because we need that for liability purposes. And then they need to choose not only the team, but the level of participation they want to be involved in. So if they only want to be involved at the local level, that's fine. We talked about regional. So if they are affected by the current incident, that they can travel maybe to the local counties, or can go across the state, maybe to a different region. Next slide, please. So for deployment, we want to make sure that the request has been made first by the emergency manager that the teams are deployed, and then they would be, their deployment would be requested at the local jurisdiction. So unless somebody calls you, you wouldn't be going out. We want to make sure that there are local relationships so that the team makeup is what you want it to be. You don't want all of your team members to be from one agency and or with one perspective. We want them to be integrated into the response and not just show up and just be there. And then we have developed a CMIST response team go kit that would have different equipment and supplies that people would need to utilize while they're there. Each CMIST team member would have a vest, and these would be in the go kits so that they can be easily identified. We have some low-tech solutions in those kits, as well as all the forms and contact information that individuals might need. So it's not that we would just be sending you out there, that we would provide you with some of the materials that you might need as well. Next slide. Questions that you guys might have.
This is Sadie. We're going to wait for questions. I'm going to keep going on. We're running out of time. Is that okay, Julia?
Yeah, that's fine.
Awesome. All right. We're actually going to, in the CMIST response team trainings, we go into a deeper dive on all of the state and local emergency support partners. So next slide. We deeper dive into what emergency management's role and responsibilities are and what they do during times of emergencies and disasters, before, during, and after. Human service areas, the emergency support function partner 6, the public health emergency support function 8, and then also what our access and functional needs program does here. So we are going to actually skip forward up to DHS EM AFN program. And what we do with this program, again, we are state supporting all of the local decision on how they want to use the CMIST response teams and how to board them. And then we will follow along with them, get them the training, the tools needed, forms, online training, go kit, help them with preparing their go kits, and then their ongoing program development mentoring. So they're not just all by themselves and all of a sudden they're the CMIST response team member and they're one and done. We want to be able to strengthen that in their communities and we start seeing how to make this a more of a professional role in those communities. Next slide. We're going to talk about in there, they will go through a vetting process where we verify their training. We also verify their background check, their vetting of their agency, and getting pictures and everything where we can work with that local emergency managers that they know that this is a people resource available during emergencies and disasters. And then they will recert annually. A lot of times, our emergency management really worries about liability. And in Colorado, we actually have a Governmental Immunity Act, which says that any of these bullets on the left, local emergency management planning committees, citizen courts, councils, and so on, and their officials, officers, directors, employees, trainees, volunteers, or any members of the subcommittee or their planning committees or incident management teams, next slide, are when they are engaged in emergency services, response activities, or emergency responses in regards to any of the emergency activities, such as an emergency or a disaster, next slide, are or they are immune to they are immune to getting lawsuits, and that's where a lot of times they're worried about all of those areas. And so in this one, it's where the lawsuits normally happen is in the planning, training, and exercise phase of preparedness, where there is no meaningful liability protection. So it's like when we have a plan for, but we don't have a plan with, it's in the planning that will have the problem. These CMIST response team members will really help strengthen that whole community inclusion. And then they will also be able to fill that gap that protect you when the response when response happens from leaving anybody behind. It could protect yourselves and your members during planning, training, and exercise activities by having these CMIST response teams. And real quick, Donna is saying in the chat that their PIO in the hospitals in the San Luis Valley, where they discuss their partner list, they have mentioned the oxygen companies, and some said the local hospitals can refill individual oxygen tanks, and that is so not true. So don't rely on just that partner. So to just clarify that point. And she's happy to discuss it after the presentation, and we will be staying on a few minutes after as well. And so with that, we're going to look at next steps and actions, and go ahead, Julia, take it away. Or are you still having connectivity?
I'm here. All right, so the next steps we want to make sure is that you understand is starting to recruit and the training of your team members, requesting the team trainings from Sadie or myself, developing your local deployment process for your area so that it's something that's going to work for you all. Integration into your local emergency operations center, standard operating guidelines, policies, and procedures. We want to make sure that we get written into those policies and procedures. Identify any additional training needs you may have, and you identify yourselves what actions might be needed to make this go forward. You need to make decisions on how you're going to go forward in your jurisdiction. Identify any local funding for your CMIST resources if you think you might need some. Provide those team trainings and go through that member approval process. Next slide. All right, so the call to action is have a local level whole community conversation about CMIST response teams, getting everybody involved, invited to meetings. So making sure your partners are there, your community leaders are there, identifying who isn't in the room. We want to make sure that everybody is part of the conversation. And then who's going to support these teams? Who's going to decide on planning, the training, the exercising, whatever it is that you may want to do? Who's going to take that primary role? I know in some communities, it looks like it's the healthcare coalitions that might be interested in doing some of this. Next slide. Question.
We're actually going to jump up to just reminding everyone that this is your menu of options, back 2 slides. Our menu of options, I did put in the chat our areas of focus before. And then now with that, we are going to open this up to any questions as we also say thank you. And we're only we're speeding this up towards the end only because of if any of you have to hop off here at the top of the hour. We are available right here. We're going to stay on for a few more minutes for any other questions, comments, concerns, or anything else you would like to share. We are going to go ahead and stop recording, but we will stay available right now here. And Tenny, yes, that is what we're doing right